considered what Europe and America might make of this election result. But how will it be received in China? Boris Johnson's campaign message was always get Brexit done, and he now has the mandate to do just that and start talks on the all-important trade deals he'll be looking to make with the rest of the world. Earlier this year, this is what the Chinese ambassador to the UK, Liu Xiaoming, told me about how China viewed the ongoing Brexit negotiations.
We certainly follow Brexit very closely because UK is a very important, not only business partner to China, but also our two countries have a lot of collaboration cross-border, politically, economically, culturally, and we are also two very important permanent members of the UN Security Council with broad agenda internationally. So we would like to see things be resolved smoothly, satisfactorily to both sides, to EU. Both UK and the EU are two important partners to China. So we wish you the best of luck. But we believe this is very much up to UK and EU.
I understand that, but is it easier for China to deal with the UK inside Europe? Because the UK is a bit of a conduit into Europe, isn't it? Or do you prefer to deal with Europe and Britain separately? What would be most advantageous to Britain?
It's very hard for us to make a choice. We only will try to make the best of what we can have. So I think there's both advantages for UK in EU and also both advantages for UK out of EU. So we have to make the best of what we can have. But UK is now building what they call it global Britain, and I think that will provide more opportunities for collaboration between China and UK.
Liu Xiaoming, the Chinese ambassador to the UK. So it would certainly seem that China has got just what the ambassador said they wanted, a degree of certainty. So what does this election result mean for UK-China relations? Well, joining me now from Beijing is Dr. Peter Ho from the London School of Economics Department of International Relations. Peter, of course, the money question is the UK free now to negotiate a free trade agreement with China?
Well, I think that question, the answer to that question is actually much more complicated than it seems, because in simple terms, it seems like when the UK is now leaving the EU, it would be free to negotiate a deal, but I think in fact you will see that China will not engage in an FTA, free trade agreement, with the UK before any clear trade agreement has been signed between the UK and the European Union. And as we know, this process has just only started. So that means that it will take quite some time before the contours of UK-EU agreement is visible, which means that it will take some time before the contours for a UK-China FTA free trade agreement will be visible as well.
Is that because, Peter, Beijing doesn't want to risk alienating its relationship with the EU?
Well, it's not just that simple. The thing is, again, that the economic relations are quite complicated. And of course, economically, the UK is much smaller than the EU. So for China, the relation with the EU is very important. So it needs to see how the relation develops with the UK and the EU first before it can strike a deal with the UK. And actually that also means that when you look at trade, it's quite what the possibilities are at this moment for a trade agreement between the United Kingdom and China.
All right, Dr. Peter Ho, many thanks indeed for joining us from Beijing. So that's the view from Beijing, but let's get some more thoughts from our election special panel, George Pascoe-Watson, Lorenzo Cordonio, and Errol Moorcoach. And what is interesting, George, we've just had the view about China, but I want to come back to domestic politics, because one of the important issues this election has thrown up, this landslide victory by the Conservatives, is also the increased vote for Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP. Are we then heading for a second referendum, but not one with Brussels, one with Scotland?
Well, there's no doubt that the increased support for the Nationalist Party in Scotland makes a second independence referendum inevitable, I would say. And which way will it go? Well, the way that the vote in the general election went last week suggests that we would see Scotland, which is my own country, saying goodbye to the United Kingdom. And there's a lot of reason for that, but the principal one is that Scotland as a whole voted to remain in the European Union. It will now be forced to leave the European Union, and the Scottish people feel quite angry about that. And that will drive a sense of nationalism. It will drive a sense of we should stand alone as a country and perhaps seek to rejoin the European Union. But of course, that's a fanciful hope, I'm afraid, for my fellow Scots. The complication of rejoining a bloc, of rejoining a currency, of inventing your own currency, of trying to find your way back into the European Union
Good luck with
is
that.
huge.
Lorenzo, would Brussels welcome Scotland with open arms? I don't think it would.
Not immediately. I think, again, as he said, Scotland will have to kind of start all over again from scratches, effectively, and so it will take a number of years. Secondly, I would say they are not going to jump into another referendum immediately, because I think the big question mark is what would be the future relationship of the UK with the EU. And I think Scotland would be better advised to wait for how the situation evolves before making any decision. So I don't think Scotland will jump into another referendum immediately. But if the situation evolves and there is a deal with the EU, it's certainly possible that we get into another referendum.
It's in Boris Johnson's gift, a second referendum on Scotland. What could happen is the Scottish leader could hold an indicative referendum to show the strength of the people and their view in Scotland, to put pressure on Boris Johnson to say, look, you can't hold out much longer. You've got to give us another formal referendum.
Errol, Mr. Trump, close links, well, links literally, golf links mainly, with Scotland. How would he see a Scottish referendum, do you think? Or how would America feel?
Well, as you know, he has a very robust golf portfolio across, all over, and his family is historically from Scotland and Fife, MacLeod family. So he would see it in the same sense as how he sees the UK, where we look at nationalism not meaning isolationism in the US and the UK, and I believe Scotland also has to come into that factor. I will say that there is a certain cultural insensitivity, being that the UK is a sort of island nation, and having their terms dictated across the border shows a little bit of cultural insensitivity, which plays into Donald Trump and Boris Johnson's narrative. So obviously he does want to protect his golf courses, and I must say I've played them and they're quite nice.
Gentlemen, starting with George, just go across the panel for your final thoughts. I couldn't read this election in the campaign, and everybody worried about tactical voting. There were so many issues coming up, and in fact the turnout wasn't the highest, probably because of the weather. But your last thoughts? I mean, I'm surprised.
I'm not surprised. I had Boris Johnson down for a victory from a long way out.
I did have him down for victory, but not with this size.
But I was quite confident they would be big, and the reasons for that: one, this country does want to leave; two, Boris Johnson is a character, people like him, he is not the establishment, a bit like Donald Trump; and number three, people could not stand Jeremy Corbyn and his approach to politics.
All right. Lorenzo, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the problem in the UK is an electoral system that basically gives no choice for the voters, and I fully agree. I mean, I was expecting such a victory, and I think I was expecting also such a big victory. I think if you are faced with a choice between Corbyn or Boris Johnson, then you have very little choice, and I think the result is that you end up with this kind of situation.
All right. And Errol, your last thoughts?
I think parallels between the Trump-Clinton campaign could be drawn between Boris and Corbyn, in the sense, and I don't mean to castigate the gentleman, but when you look at him in today's 21st century politics, there's a lot of optics, and no disrespect to him, but when you look at Boris, people like him. When you look at Jeremy Corbyn, in the same way that you look at Hillary Clinton, people have an inherent aversion to that kind of personality. There's certain little gaffes. It sounds very simple, but when he was pouring a pint incorrectly, and Boris Johnson can pour it clearly, these things sound funny, but the optics in this kind of presidential world, it's the 21st century, and if you want to win the 21st century, you can't use 20th century tactics.
All right, gentlemen, thank you all. I'll drink to that. We have to leave it there. George Pascoe, Watson, Lorenzo, Codogno, and Errol, more coach. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us here on this election special.